right. It's working. Is it working? Yeah.
Maybe it was because the sound was smooth before.
No, it's okay, I think. Yes, here we go afterwards. So, cool. Welcome everybody to the afternoon session on, let me see, gender and intersectional perspectives in the governance of natural resources, I guess. You might be wondering why I'm standing here and not the announced session chair, Thomas Tyler. Yeah, it's about gender issues. He has the kids today. So that's the reason why I'm chairing the session. Initially, we thought about co-chairing. Actually, it's not me who is doing the research on intersectionality, but he's doing the research on intersectionality. So while I'm doing stuff on natural resources, so we somehow share the field a little bit. Before we start, I think we have 1.5 hours. I just want to recheck the presenters. I know there's a presenter over here, a presenter over there, 3, 4. What's your name?
Maria.
Maria, let me see. Oh yeah, Maria Blanco.
Yes.
Then I have Immaculate, that's you. Renee.
Yes. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Great.
You're online. That's good to know. Hi, Renee.
Hello. Yes. And
Hi.
I sent just
Yeah.
a brief one is that I sent a presentation for uploading, if that's where I uploaded a presentation, which would be best because of network here.
I don't think I have the one already before. Because I don't have access to the of this.
All right, I think you have to run it by yourself. So let's see, and let's pray and hope for the best that things are actually running then.
Okay.
Yeah. So Renee is here, and then I have Caroline.
Yeah.
Hi, Caroline. Good to see you. Cool. So plenty of presentations. Little time, what I learned from the last session, I should stop talking. Hi, good to see you. Take a seat. And hand over, I would say we do the presentations and then short discussion, and then we move on. Is that okay? I think we're a small group, so if there is anything we can easily move forward. Yeah? All right, then let's move to the first presentation. May I ask you to climb the stage? And let's see.
Can I just choose that mic? This is not like sitting right.
It's not sitting right. You want to use that one? All right.
Or I can be loud enough. I think. With my specs.
Yep. Oh. That is the name of the long hair. Thank you. So here's your mic. Switch off that one. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So hello everyone. Thanks for making it to this session. My name is Kritika. I work with International Rice Research Institute. Yeah, thank you. So I work with the International Rice Research Institute with their offices located in India. At International Rice Research Institute, I work across CGI Initiative for Gender Equality, CGI Initiative for Seed Equal, and Gender Impact Platform Evidence Module. So this work and presentation that you are seeing here today is part of CGI Gender Impact Platform's work. I will be here talking about gender governance for sustainable transformation of agri-food systems. So I'll just get on with the presentation. Now, this work and this presentation is part of a paper that we are developing on the same topic, particularly in the South Asian context. The paper is still under development, but this presentation is going to talk about key insights emerging from that paper. Now, and the paper is based on synthesis and qualitative analysis of the existing secondary literature in this domain. Now, talking about agri-food systems, in literature, there are various definitions of what agri-food systems are, how they are defined, what does agri-food systems include. So here is one of them, and it encompasses a lot of things. So it talks about that agri-food systems contains all the elements, including environment, people, inputs, processes, infrastructures, institutions, and activities that relate to the production, processing, distribution, preparation, and consumption of food, and the outputs of these activities, including socio-economic and environmental outcomes. It's important to note here that agri-food systems is not just a product of food in terms of food, but it is also socio-economic environmental processes that are involved in the production and consumption of those food items. Another important thing that these systems, because there are so many actors involved, there are so many institutions involved, these systems are ever changing and evolving. There are external factors like climate change, there are factors like policy, political orientation. So these systems, because of everything coming together, are in a constant state of flux. But still, there is something called dynamic stability in these systems. Even when they are in constant state of flux, they remain stable and they have a way of operating. At one point in time, they remain stable and they operate in a certain way. This becomes important later to know that these systems, although they are changing and adapting, they are very slow to respond to external shocks of climate change. We'll talk more about this later. So another important element of agri-food systems that I want to focus on, that because these systems have multiple actors with varied interests. Somebody is looking at these agri-food systems for the purpose of livelihood generation. Somebody is looking at them for the environmental impact. So there are varying interests and objectives. That is why the governance of these systems and looking at the governance of these systems is very important. So through this paper and this presentation, we are trying to make a case of how adopting a gender equality lens in governance can facilitate equitable and sustainable transformations in agri-food system. Now, what is governance? What is gender governance? And why do we need it? So, governance basically involves systems of rules, institutions, and authorities that collectively coordinate and manage society. When I say gender governance basically talks about that in these processes, are there inherent gender biases? Do these processes and societal institutions react and respond differently based on gender? That's what we are referring to here as gendered governance. Now, the complexity of agri-food systems is also mirrored in the governance of agri-food systems. As I had discussed earlier that agri-food systems are complex, the governance also becomes complex. So, but the important point that I mentioned earlier, that this governance of food systems also define their ability to respond and adapt to socio-economic climate shocks. But as I have written here, there's a dearth of research of how these governance system functions. What are the processes of what are the stages of these governance systems? What are the levels of these governance systems? And how different elements of gender, food security, environmental sustainability comes together with agri-food systems in order to form a holistic governance system. As I discussed earlier, there are challenges in governance due to different objectives and actors. Different actors are involved in the governance and agri-food systems for livelihood generation, for food and nutrition security, for environmental impact, and for power equity. Now, power equity here becomes important because in agri-food systems, especially in the context of South Asia, a lot of work is performed by women at various stages, not just at the stage of production, but at various stages of in agri-food systems, a lot of work is being performed by women. But even when there's a larger share of work and role of women in these agri-food systems, we don't see that them performing similar role in the governance systems. So to overcome this mismatch, how do we design governance systems that mirror the work that is being performed in agri-food systems and also is replicated in the decision-making power that comes through the governance of these agri-food systems. Now, so how do we design a gendered food systems governance design so that these agri-food systems move on to a sustainable and equitable functioning? Here, I want, before getting into these strategies, I also want to emphasize that the agri-food systems, although they might involve many actors, but they are not perfect in themselves. They are not always inclusive. They are not always equitable. As I had mentioned in my example, although women performing a lot of work, they do not get equal share in decision-making process. Many women are involved in the production processes, but they are not involved across the value chain. They're not involved in making decisions about finances. They're not involved in decision about marketing. So that's where the gap lies. Now here, emanating from secondary literature's qualitative synthesis are some strategies of how we can design a gendered food security governance design. So the first point, and these are majorly emanating from literature based in South Asia. So decentralized governance structure and decision making seeking to inform higher level decisions and bottom up. As I discussed, that governance happens on various levels. It can happen at an international level, it can happen at a national level, it can also happen at a localized level. But for a governance system to be decided at an international level and that to percolate and govern the system that is very local becomes a problem because the local system is not properly understood in these terms. So I have a few examples for here. How a decentralized governance and decision-making system for agri-food systems can help overcome challenges that are there in agri-food systems. So we have something called self-help groups and farmer-producer companies in India. Many of these self-help groups and farmer-producer companies are all-women groups and collectives. These group and collectives have various objectives. They work in doing agricultural production together. If one single woman does not have linkage to the market, they work collectively to negotiate price. They work collectively to source inputs for their agricultural produce. So many of the decisions that one single individual cannot take can be taken by them as a collective, as it increases the negotiating power, it increases the circulation of information amongst them. So that is one. Okay, there's a need to take a systems perspective with a multi-level and multi-actor approach. Instead of treating segments like consumption, consumer or production producer as separate segments and entities in agri-food systems. Here, we are making a case that we need to see agri-food systems and their governance as not two separate entities, but looking at agri-food systems through a systems lens, as these are socio-ecological systems which involve human actors as well as non-human actors. In this, as you might have experienced in your own countries or locations as well, there are different segments. There will be a part of the government governing livelihoods. There will be a part of the sector governing women's employment. There will be a part of the sector governing food and income security. There will be a part that will be governing food production and agricultural production. So we have very separate and segmented sectors for it. But when we are talking of governance, these sectors need to come together and converge and devise a holistic strategy or framework so that these separate sectors do not create conflicting strategies, right? So coming on to the next point, a lot of work in agri-food systems, especially in developing countries, happens in the informal sector. For example, seed production. A lot of seed that seed producer groups and seed producer women farmers have are sourced through informal chains. They do not approach the formal sector of government institutions to buy and secure seed. But there is no cognizance of how does this informal sector work, what is actually the horizon of this informal sector? What are the processes that are involved in this informal sector? What is the value chain that is involved in this informal sector? We have very little information about that. So in designing our governance strategies and in understanding agri-food systems, informal sector plays a very important role which needs to be taken care of. Coming to the next aspect, collaborative and collective efforts, women's leadership at various nodes of governance, especially at the local levels. I mentioned SNGs and farm producer companies. In India, we have increasingly seen, 5 minutes left. In India, we have increasingly seen that women are portrayed as agents of change, and being portrayed as these agents of change, they are they're required to fulfill certain kind of targets that is given to them by the development paradigm. We are seeing them as agents of change, but this agents of change does not translate into power being given to them to make decisions. Even when they are made leaders, the power distribution is not there. So here, what I'm saying is that even when we are creating collaborations and collectives, women's leadership and the power transfer is of eminent importance, because it is these women who understand their context, it is these women who work in their context, and it is and the society and the community, because these women belong to the same society and community, is more receptive to their ideas, to the changes they want to propose. Somebody sitting in a different location will not be that aware of what changes these women, especially at their local levels, can bring about. The next point also connects to this point. Even when we are designing governance strategies, so governance is not something that is a new concept, right? When we are functioning in a system, it is already being governed in some way or other by the actors involved in it. But while designing our governance strategies and while looking at those governance strategies, we need to understand what are these already existing governance systems. For example, in many of the Adivasi communities that I have worked with, they have a system of how much they want to extract from the forest, in what season they want to extract what from the forest, and it's a self-regulating system. So we need to take cognizance of such systems that are already in place in trying to understand that how different actors in the agri-food systems can be governed. Coming to the next point, institutional support mechanism for long-term sustained efforts and outcomes, state as an important facilitator. As we have seen in a lot of our work that we all have project deadlines. Even when we are carrying out a project, if the project is for 3 years, even if it's making positive change, what happens to that change after 3 years? So the point is that we need to create infrastructure. We need to put infrastructure in place that makes a continued and sustainable change and a persisting change possible. And state becomes an important factor in that, because state has a wide infrastructure and state has a omnipresence in that sense. Also, while saying all this, while devising these key strategies about how can we make a gendered governance food security system, there is a huge lack of robust evidence on how food systems are governed, what better ways they can be governed, how do these food systems governance can lead to sustainability and equity. So there is a dire need to generate evidence on this. So I would end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have time for one question, maybe, if there is one. We've made many presentations. No question. Thank you so much. And I would actually call the second presenter, Maria. Fantastic. Maria will introduce us to her work, and she will present the feminist institutional approach and discussing the inclusion of gender and intersectionality in land, food, and climate change policy. Maria, you want to have the handheld or you want to have the?
Yes, I think it's good
Yeah, because we have actually people online.
online.
Yes.
So you can hear me well, all of you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I will present today myself first. My name is Maria Alejandra Blanco. I am from Colombia, from Cali. I am working in the Alliance Biodiversity CIAT in the area of impact evaluation. And today I will present some preliminary results regarding of our work in gender and policy analysis. Of our paper, Inclusion of Gender and Intersectionality in Land, Food, and Climate Change Policy, a Feminist Institutional Approach. So this is a work related with the CGR Contribution Gender Platform and the National Policies and Strategies for Food, Land, and Water System Transformation. So first, why Colombia is an important case study. So as you already know, if you know, Colombia has experienced one of the longest army conflict in the world. In 2016, we made the signature of the peace agreement with FARC guerrilla. And in 2022, it was the election of the first left-wing president, Gustavo Petro, that is also a ex-guerrilla former with a relative majority in the Congress. What is the status of gender in policy? Well, I think we have made a lot of progress in positioning gender equality at both and global and national level. We have the incorporation of the Beijing platform, and gender mainstreaming is considered also crucial for agricultural issues related with food and climate policies in Colombia. So we made two research questions for this paper. The first one is what is the level of gender and intersectionality inclusion within the Colombian food, climate, and land policies and the National Development Plan. And the second one is how are gender and social issues portrayed and included in Colombia's relevant food, climate, land policies and the National Development Plan. So for this research, we want to include four concepts that we consider that is important to highlight. The first one is gender, that is a social construct that refers to relation between the sexes based on their roles and responsibility. The second one is the intersectionality, that is go beyond the gender traditionality concept of gender binarity, and is go forward a more complex concept that involves gender, class, age, ethnicity, religion, geography, and sexuality. And we have as well the concept of policy integration. In this way, we are going to focus in two approaches. The first one is the transformative mainstreaming, and the second one is the integrationist policy practices. The first approach for the policy integration looks for a practical and radical transformative with gender issues. And in the second one, the integrationist policy practices looks for a change, but without any radical change in policy related with gender. So in the last concept, the feminist institutional approach, it allows us to understand how gender power relations are reproduced and are difficult to change, but focusing on the role of institutional processes and practices. And in this concept, we are mainly focused in the constraining and catalyzing factors that are involved in the discourse analysis that I will show you in the methods. So for the methods that we use for this study, we incorporate two approaches. The first one is the policy analysis, and in the second one, we have discourse analysis. The policy document analysis, we are focused on gender and intersectionality at several levels. The first one, we were focusing the objective, We analyze also the problem and solutions formulations in these policy documents. We make a work on with keywords related with this concept, with gender and intersectionality. And we also made the question how gender and women are presented are portrayed. That is also related with the results that my colleague was presenting before. And the second one is we made key informants interview with the objective of examining the barriers and progress to gender mainstreaming in these policy domains. So for the first step in our methods, we use a policy mapping process. And we are basically mainly considering two criteria. The first criteria was that has a relation with this policy domain, food, land, and climate, and gender. And the second one is the validity of the policy documents. And as a result, we consider 15 policy documents to analyze. For policy domain, and also as we are in the context of the peace agreement, we also consider the cross-cutting policy domain incorporating the national development plan. And in gender, we consider two policies to analyze. And for the key interviews, we made 18 interviews with 29 stakeholders, and we consider the different organizations, international cooperation, social movement, and ONGs. So what are the main results of our first stage of the policy analysis? So in general, we found that gender and intersectionality is mainly found in the National Development Plan and land policies. And why this is happened? Because there are a lot of influence of the peace agreements. This influence has a lot of intervention for incorporation of the gender and intersectionality measure. For example, in land policies, we found that the problem solutions are involved for land access and restitution, because it's mentioned a lot of how can be treated the victim, the women's victims of the conflict for land access and restitution process. Women in land policies are seen as are portrayed as a non-homogeneous group. This is the law and the decree 90 have inclusion element related to the peace agreement, as I mentioned. In the National Development Plan, this is the most inclusive and progressive approach to incorporate gender and intersectionality. We found that the National Development Plan have a lot of terms related with the intersectionality, with the LGBT community, feminists. Also, this is the first law in Colombia that has the recognition of campesino as a subject of law. In the case of climate change policies, in these policies, gender has a lot of incorporation right there, but just in this policy, the PAGCCHE, there is the primary climate change policy for the agricultural sector in Colombia. In this policy has a lot of influence for international cooperation that has in this way women are portrayed as a diverse group, and also as agents of change in the agricultural sector. In food policies, we found two different approaches. The first approach is a human-centered issue concerning food and nutrition security. In this approach, women are seen with a stereotypical vision of gender. Women are seen as a mother with emphasis on their pivotal role in reproduction to ensure food security for their children. So in these policies, children are the main target for the solutions and the problems. So in that way, if we feed the children, if the woman feed the children, we can resolve the food insecurity problems in Colombia. And the second one is related with a technical challenge focus on performance and competitiveness. I think this one. And the last one with gender policies, empower mainly is through economic change. Men remain the reference comparison when it's all about the problem situation of women in Colombia. Men remain the reference. So in the results of the key informants interview, we made a discourse analysis with a thematic and narrative analysis. We found 4 constraining factors related with this inclusion of gender and intersectionality. The first one is the transversal constraining factors. The second one is the challenges related to land policy. The third one is the challenges related to food. And the last one is the challenge related to climate policy. We found that there is a consensus across this type of actor. The most mentioned narrative across this policy is the agriculture is a sexist sector, the care economy issue. There is a gender gap related to land access. If the food-related disease involve gender and intersectionality factors. Then I want to show you 2 quotes that we feel like it's important to highlight. The first one quotation is related with the food-related disease in both gender and intersectionality factors. A government officer mentioned that statistically women are the ones who carry all the coping strategy linked to food issue at home. And this also is complement that a woman for a social movement that she mentioned that sometimes it's not only because there is no food, but it's because there is no time. Okay, perfect. And the second one involves the issue of land access in Colombia. As I already mentioned, the land policies in Colombia have a lot of influence for the peace agreement, and women are also a main target for this policy. This government officer mentioned for the issue of gender and intersectionality inclusion, she was called to women's table, but we internally had challenges and budgetary difficulties. The budget to finance us and bring women into the territory was a budget designated only for women, and since she biologically appears as a man, we had difficulties to finance her. So in the catalyzing factors, we have a lot of influence for the social movement, the peace agreements, and the international cooperation. And also we found that these new governments appears as a window of opportunity for change into food, land, waters, and climate policies in Colombia. So, what are our main conclusions, or what is the main contribution of these papers, our research? So, one of the first contributions here is our heuristic methods that we use, because in many cases, the stories and the policy analysis and the key informants interview are opposite. But here we found that the discourse and the policy analysis that we did have a lot of similar lines between the things that are mentioned in the policy analysis and in the discourse from the different stakeholders. Also, as I mentioned before, there is a window of opportunity for these new contexts of the first elected women president and also the peace agreement. So it's a policy, it's opportunity for policy change, consider this gender and intersectionality inclusion in policies. However, there are some risks related with the duplication between different programs that has a lot of influence from different sectors and other social programs as well. Intersectionality is also has difficulties, as I showed you before. There are a lot of resistance to incorporate the intersectionality inclusion for land restitution in Colombia, for example. There are also a lot of risk of duplication between the activities. So At the end, I want to highlight one of the statements for one of the key interviews that mentioned that the country has been having a moment of coherence where everyone has tried to include the race approach, the gender approach, the territorial approach, and the differential approach. So it's a unique opportunity to make any change, and this story also contributed to see what are the main links between land, food, and climate change in Colombia. So thank you so much. I try to be very quick.
Oh, you did a great job. Thanks so much, Maria. Is there any immediate question for clarification before? Yes, please, go ahead.
I have a question about the National Development Plan. I think I can explain a little bit about especially like the land access and community of care as a problem and solution. Can you explain a little bit more of that?
Yes, there are a lot of interventions right now related with this issue because the government wants to create a database with the intentions of quantify the time that women spends in different domestic activities and receive a payment for them. For example, they already incorporating this approach with the land restitutions to women in Colombia, to rural women in Colombia. So they fill different documents, and they resolve like several questions related to the where the time that they are spending between the different activities. This also has a score, and it's a affirmative action that the government wants to recognize. However, there are a lot of resistances because there are a lot of interventions between them, and the definition of economy of care is also like many people in the rural sector is used to see that is the labor that women have to spend time doing these domestical labors, but it's already like transforming the structural change and goes beyond a transformative approach that I was mentioned before with the policy integration. So
Thank you, Maria, for clarification. I have to move on already, and I think we have an online presentation now. Is that correct, René?
Yes, hello, thank you. Would you mind enabling me to share my screen? Unless you have the uploaded version, which I would be fine with that one.
It should be possible. Can you try once more to share?
I don't have the, let's see. I am not sure that I have the, let me.
We have actually, you should have access actually.
I wonder if I chose the correct way to get in. Oh, let me see. Oh, goodness. I don't see it. Goodness. I do have my presentation up. However, in the Zoom that I entered, I don't have that option of sharing.
Actually, from our end, you have the access rights for sharing. So I'm a little bit clueless how I could help you.
All right, let me see.
René, what about that? Maybe you can actually figure it out and we can move on and then put it after the next one. Is that okay?
That's very fine. In the meantime, I'll leave and rejoin and see if
All right, let's do it like
All right,
this.
thanks.
Okay. Okay, it's very good that we're all super flexible. And I thought you this for your presentation. Thank you very much. Which one do you like?
We can have more, more.
Can you hear me? So, yeah, can you hear me clearly? Yeah, okay, all right. So thank you so much. My name is Immaculate Ida, and I'll be presenting on gender mainstreaming in sustainable land and water management, insights from the Lake Victoria Basin. So this work was done in collaboration with EASA and with funding from the Austrian Development Corporation. So I'll just give a little bit of a snippet on the Lake Victoria Basin itself, just for the sake of people in the room who may not have an overview. So this is the largest freshwater lake in Africa, spanning up around 69,000 square kilometers. And just for comparison, Austria is around 80,000 square kilometers. So you can just compare how vast it is. So, and the Lake Victoria itself has a catchment which spans across 5 countries. So you have this really complex landscape that has rivers, the lake itself, and also wetlands. And we have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. So it houses around 45 million inhabitants. And the main economic activities here are agriculture and fishing, which is practiced by both men and women. And so looking at it as a land and water resource, the interaction of men and women with this ecosystem is really different. As my fellow speakers mentioned earlier, there are different, there's disparities in terms of how the men and women in terms of land ownership and access, especially on the women's side. Also, women usually collect water for household uses, but in terms of roles and responsibilities and access, there's a bit of disparities which are shaped by the social cultural norms. And so gender mainstreaming then comes in because we're really ensuring that we take into consideration the needs, the aspirations, the experiences of men and women when planning programs, at programmatic and also on the institutional level. And that means then that we really need to also understand how organizations integrate gender into their operations and project frameworks. So that was my study purpose and scope, looking at what are some of the gender mainstreaming efforts in organizations focusing on sustainable land and water management in the Lake Victoria Basin, looking at the impact across multiple outcome areas, and also looking at the barriers and the factors for creating an enabling environment for implementation of gender strategies. My geographical scope was limited. I focused on Kenya and Uganda within the Lake Victoria Basin. And so what we did is that we held conversations with 32 organizations across Kenya and Uganda, sectors, NGOs, academia, public sector, private sector, and civil society. And out of these 32 organizations, 22 have put in place a gender strategy, while 5 are in the process of developing one. Majority of the organizations have put in place these strategies recently. And we also looked at how have these organizations implemented the gender strategy. So you find that majority of the organizations focused on sensitizing the top leadership, staff and top leadership, and also training. And also a few of them also looked at conducting gender analysis and also regular review and updates and organizational structuring. And a few of them also looked at also influencing of products and services. So from this table, majority of the organizations really focused on ensuring that the top leadership got the concept and also sensitization of their staff and training. We also looked at some of the principles of gender mainstreaming that these organizations have applied. And we looked at it in different aspects. We looked at it in terms of gender audit, gender responsive budgeting, impact assessment, capacity development, communication in terms of the images and their language, gender analysis for strategic planning of policies, whether they collect sex disaggregated data in their work that they do, monitoring and evaluation, and also integrating gender into their administrative aspects, the terms of preferences, vacancies, and gender awareness raising. So looking at this table in a little bit more detail, you find that very few organizations really apply or rather work on auditing, gender responsive budgeting, and also impact assessment. And majority of them really focus on gender awareness raising, which is interesting. So also we looked at the impact of the gender strategy across key outcome areas, which was looking at improved scaling, also looking at the organization in more details in terms of staff engagement and operational performance and increasing efficiency and donor satisfaction, enhanced innovation and advantage on the market. And we find that improved scaling and greater staff engagement was mentioned as the main impact, and some of the gender-related drivers that were reported to enhance scaling efforts was capacity development and also increased women participation in decision-making. Okay, all right. So moving from that, sorry. We also looked at we asked respondents what were some of the barriers to implementing the gender strategy. So you find that respondents mentioned that as much as gender equality is really high on the agenda, they do have competing priorities, which also links to funding. So they have to actually allocate the resources for other aspects. And also there was an interesting concept about lack of familiarity with gender mainstreaming as a concept, which is actually explained by one respondent who mentioned that they have, in the region, they have not yet understood the concept of gender and actually the importance of gender mainstreaming in policies and development plans, and therefore there's a real need to actually build actors' capacity in the concept. In terms of the key factors contributing to successful implementation, one of the factors mentioned that you really have to have that buy-in from the top leadership, because then it sets the tone for gender mainstreaming to the whole organization. Once the top leadership has the concept, then it trickles down to what is actually being done. And actually it also relates to investment in terms of funding for also human and also financial resources, and also investment in dedicated gender focal persons who would actually guide the gender mainstreaming process in terms of guiding the organization and actually helping them develop and create clear and comprehensive gender policies, and also regular staff sensitization and training. So it has to be ongoing, not just on a one level. So in terms of my conclusion, then we find that while organizations have really made efforts in gender mainstreaming, there are some gaps that are remaining in implementation, budgeting, and impact assessment. There's no harmonization of the gender strategies across the region. And effective gender mainstreaming needs committed leadership from the top level, having dedicated and intentional resources. So as much as you have resources, you really have to really be intentional about allocating budgeting for gender, and also a culture of inclusivity, changing the mindset in the organization, and building capacity in gender mainstreaming in the region remains crucial. And this also translates to all the 5 countries, because the Lake Victoria Basin is a transboundary resource. So it's not only in Kenya and Uganda, but also in all the whole region. And actually, because there's really no kind of like platform where like information is documented, there's the need to create a dedicated platform to document some of the gender mainstreaming efforts for accountability, where people can be able to assess progress, gaps, successes, learnings, and best practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Other questions?
Thank you for
Yeah, I think it's better. Yeah. I will. Yeah. You're right.
No, please come. So, yeah, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering whether the result that people are not familiar with the concept of gender, how to interpret it. Because in my experience, when you say, okay, the concept of gender, maybe they don't know, they don't understand, and so on. But when you discuss about the social roles, the norms, the opportunities, and so on, that people know, they understand, they know even, and that the fact is moreover that they don't know how to react, what to do, how to change norms, how to create more opportunities. No, so because in my experience, people often said we don't want more sensitization, we don't want more concept, we just want to know what we in our work can do to improve the situation, to have more gender equality.
Thank you so much for that question. The respondent who spoke about it was actually a technical person who is not even, doesn't even work on gender mainstreaming, completely different. He was an environmentalist. And the aspect of gender mainstreaming is really to shift the mindset in terms of transformative change in the institutions. And in order for example, at institution level, charity begins at home. You have to actually, for example, if we have staff in an organization, they actually have to have that gender equality mindset that, you know, I'm a man and she's a woman, and we have different unique interests, and also at the same time also we need to, for example, in terms of positions in board members and you know, so when you're able to shift that mindset internally, then it also shifts into the field. But I do understand the aspect that people just want to be told, you know, just tell me what to do. And that's the mindset of most people at the moment. But at the same time, and I do acknowledge that gender mainstreaming has very different concepts, definitions. There are so many definitions out there. But at the same time, also, we are trying to ensure that people actually at least have a little understanding, not very in-depth understanding of gender inequality, whether or not gender is your field or not. And that's why when working on, when implementing the gender strategy, it's not just only staff who would be interested in gender who would attend, but it's the whole staff, whether you are working in finance, because gender equality applies to everyone. But it depends on how in-depth you want to go to, but at least there should be some aspect of some surface information for everyone too. I don't know if I've answered your question. Yeah. Yeah.
A very quick one, very quick. You have to promise me. Oh my, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the insightful presentation. I did a similar study among 30 NGOs in Kenya, and something that came up there is that almost everyone is doing some gender mainstreaming, which is already great. However, what often happens is that people do it for the donor because it's required. And I work for a donor organization, and so they openly stated that. Luckily, they collect data, disaggregate it. But then the question is, do we really use it? No, we actually don't really use it. And so it seems like it's somehow there that, and there's also a desire to do something, but then there's the accountability issue, and partners are somehow in between. Have you faced that, this we do it for the donor attitude?
Yes, actually, it also linked to funding, because whatever the donor says is what you do. So if the donor doesn't necessarily want to have a gender lens in the project, then you're tied. But and I think that also links to having that culture. I know it's funding is a very it's a very sensitive aspect, especially if you go to a donor and you say, according to our principles or our strategy as an organization, we need to actually have a gender lens because you're dependent on their funding. So yes, it's true. It's actually dependent on on funding. And what I know is that majority of donors nowadays usually want to have a gender lens. I think at least that's what the projects in the Lake Victoria Basin are about, because gender is really a very critical topic. It's a very hot debate. So majority of the projects in the Lake Victoria Basin have a somewhat gender lens in it, probably not in depth, but most donors then have if the donor doesn't include it, then in a proposal, most of these organizations then kind of include like a gender lens aspect, but probably not in-depth, dependent on funding. But yes, we also have that problem where your decision to actually move into gender depends on whether the donor thinks it's important or not. That's true. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Sure.
Satisfied so far?
Yeah.
All right. Then, thank you so much. Big applause for the presentation once more. Thank you. And let's try again if we get the technical issue done. Renee, are you still with us? Are you again with us? No. Yeah, she is. Renee? Renee, are you there?
There, yes.
Let's give it another try. Actually, you have again access rights, so it should work.
But from where would I, it's like, the share screen is no, it's not an option.
Maybe it's if you have the, oh, it's late. Actually, there should be a green button that says freigeben. Maybe if you have it in German.
I don't even have that. That's the issue.
Are you using a Mac or are you using a PC?
Regular, just a regular one. However, I don't have the option to share a screen in the green. I don't have that.
Then I'm also lost, actually. If you can't share a screen, then I'm. Can you call somebody from Technics, maybe? Okay.
Are you able to make me a host?
Yeah. Try to share it in the chat, and maybe we can actually try to, if there is the function to share documents.
I see the chat is disabled in mine.
No chat. You have the presentation. Well, then let's start the presentation.
That is it. Yes, beautiful. I saw it. Now I don't see it, but yeah, I would be more than happy.
Jesus.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And always a bit complicated. I apologize.
No problem. Okay. I'll just guide you.
I do it.
Rangeland management, understanding women's engagement.
Renee?
Yes. Yes.
Think your voice-to-voice running. Is that possible?
Oh, yeah, that is. I could just be quiet then, if you don't mind, because you have my uploaded video.
No. Actually, I stopped the voiceover. So
okay.
Slowly we're getting there.
I think the challenge now is that
all right.
I don't know.
I will be your lovely assistant.
Wonderful.
Yeah? So
okay,
if you want to move your presentation, you just let me know.
Okay, I will start now. I'm ready.
Well, shoot.
Thank you for helping in this. So the title of this presentation is Participatory Rangeland Management, Understanding Women's Engagement and Implications for Social Change. This is based on a publication that came out in 2022 with co-authors Philip Meriti and Diana Lopez. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share that this is part of a series of efforts to work in a particular location in Kenya. So we've been working there, collecting evidence through mixed methods to inform an intervention that we have been implementing this year, which is more along the lines of gender transformation and inclusive adaptation in communities affected by climate change. Next slide, please. Adaptation and resilience. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So adaptation and resilience in pastoral contexts is a complex issue. Governance of rangelands is, of course, very important. So rangeland management institutions are usually set up to bolster resilience, to improve the conditions of rangelands through sustainable management. There are often customary institutions in pastoral areas that include grazing, water committees. However, the tendency is that within these customary institutions are often elders and men in particular. So women, young people might not have a voice in committees that manage the resources. And if they are included, opportunities for participation, active participation and agency might be limited because of different power dynamics within the community. Next slide, please. So PRM is participatory rangeland management. It is a land use planning and management approach that's intended to develop sustainable rangeland management plans and agreements between local institutions and county governments. So they are legally binding. PRM was piloted in Tanzania and in Kenya and Baringo County in 4 locations. I'll focus a little bit more on Paka Hills, where our work has continued. And the aim was to strengthen capacities of national governments, civil society organizations, and communities, and to develop guidelines for management plans that have clear rules about access, use, rights, and so forth, based on whatever the community prioritizes as the main interests that they have for their rangelands. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're in Baringo County. Through Reconcile implemented PRM, and in the early stages, they conduct a stakeholder analysis, and they found that there was a lot of mismanagement of resources through unsustainable resource extraction. There is a lot of charcoal burning, and there's also extensive livestock keeping. They've shifted from cows to more goats, but yeah, there are still a lot of livestock that are leading to bare grounds. So there were, back in 2018 and 19, they found that there was poor land use planning and management, and the governance systems were rather weak. Some of these areas are very remote. So it was also very difficult for some organization within communities across vast rangeland contexts, not a lot of transparency and accountability or monitoring. And there was also a low capacity for kind of organizing and structuring many of the governance issues. Next slide, please. This provides a picture of the Baringo rangeland conditions. Mainly, it's very hilly, rocky, and a lot of bare grounds with seasonal water sources. And drought in the last few years have really affected overall reaching.
Are you still here, Renee?
The regrowth of vegetation, which next slide, please. See, I can't see your screen, but I'm not seeing yours, so I'm going off of mine. So if you're on 7, let me know.
I'm on the page with
Yes.
the research questions.
Okay, great. Yes. So the overarching question was, how does participation in PRM contribute to social change, understood as changes in women's agency and rangeland institutions and the wider community and even possibly households? So we had sub-questions of how do women participate in decision-making in PRM through stakeholder meetings, the development of the management plan, and committee meetings. And the second question was, what changes, if any, has PRM brought about in gender relations, recognizing that it's more about the interactions, because PRM is, it's also operated in combination with other kinds of pressures in these places, like especially economic hardship. So PRM, to some extent, we explored how that may have affected some of the gender relations. Next slide, please. So the context is that, just a little bit of background is that Kenya, there is legislation to ensure that women occupy at least 1/3 of management positions within committees and groups, etc. So that's kind of been a very helpful reference for mobilizing women into committees. For example, I mentioned that drought and flooding of Lake Baringo has really hit and affected the area in extreme ways. It's also an area of insecurity that is also motivated by degraded resources that then in pastoral areas that people are also competing for resources. So cattle rustling is quite common in these areas, very limited exposure to different ways of doing things because of poor infrastructure and public assistance, also not always providing for these communities some of the basic needs. Household practices, there's a lot of polygynous household arrangements, migrating out during the dry season, so temporary housing, and not a lot of diversification, which would support adaptation practices in general. Next slide, please. For this particular study, we used a framework that we adapted to try to assess how women participated, to just classify from nominal to more empowering ways of participating through the latter numbers 5 and 6, more interactive approaches in rangeland institutions, and then number 6, really trying to look at what kinds of changes might occur in gender relations as a result of participating in PRM, which was a 3-year project, I might add. Next slide, please. Mixed methods approaches with focus group discussions, always disaggregated by sex and age, key informant interviews, and we use thematic analysis in vivo. And this is a shot of where Baringo is located within Kenya. Next slide, please. When we looked at how women when looking at how women participate in decision-making processes, through the surveys, women had quite high levels of participation and self-reporting. And so it was classified as an active form of participation because they're quite active in some of the decision-making and the management plans. So giving priority and talking about water, for example, because it's something that women are primarily responsible for, fetching water. And through some of the descriptions of their changes, there seemed to be some evidence of good levels of participation and also being able to contribute to management plans. Next slide, please. Gender roles in households and communities are a bit stickier. So the PRM had a number of different activities, including the introduction of beehives, which are traditionally something that men manage, in part because traditional beehives are higher up in the trees. So you can see in one of the pictures, they're higher up, so men climb the trees and harvest. So this PRM intervention, they provided modern hives, which are lower to the ground, so don't require climbing. However, there are still a lot of taboos around women harvesting, selling, managing the income. So while some of the participation levels kind of showed that women moved into something that's more of a men's activity, and women were doing that within women's groups, there was still a limitation, often through household relations, that kind of it thwarted efforts that would allow women to manage income from honey sales, for example. There were a few changes mentioned in households, and mainly that was through descriptions of husbands being supportive. Husbands are much more supportive of wives who are going out to earn income, so more increased mobility if there's something that can be invested into the household, and in very fewer cases where men might help out in household chores, which is very much within women's domain in that area. Next slide, please. So some of the kind of summary findings were that it was participation in multiple PRM activities that reinforced women's agency. PRM had a number of capacity building exercises. They also had women who came from Reconcile, and I think even seeing women in leadership in NGOs really helped bolster kind of more confidence of women stepping into leadership roles. Enhanced skills are helpful, but they need more efforts if they're to be really changing some of the relations in society. So access to income was certainly something that both women and men really appreciated. And consultative participation through contributions to management plans was also something that women said that their views were recognized most of the time. But I think when it comes to household changes, it's difficult because this particular intervention didn't have that as they didn't have that as part of their mission. The mission is primarily around land management in participatory ways. So it's understandable that some of the household level changes were modest. Next slide, please. I think there are a number of still challenges and opportunities in the area. So mobilities still are constrained, and I think the care work, especially energy and water, are substantial in dryland locations. I think another thing that was mentioned was that leading groups, women as leaders of mixed groups, remains a challenge. In Paca in particular, women weren't allowed to stand in the public meetings in barazas. It was always women would go to the side. But a change that has occurred is that women will sit in the front and may speak during barazas. It's a very restrictive kind of location. And there are, I think, opportunities. There are multiple drivers of change. So it's climate in addition to other pressures that are kind of driving women and men into different roles. So there are increased burdens, but there is also some kind of opening of spaces that women might engage in. Opportunities that are very visible to women or women leaders. And also there's interest in collective action, but it's still quite limited for a number of reasons. Next slide, please. So women's agency.
I'm so sorry if I do not.
Okay. All right. So women's agency and rangeland management institutions can lead to tangible reductions in time and labor. I think primarily around water and trees and even herding activities. So taking the goats out to places that might be managed better rather than extensive periods out of the home. Women's active participation helps get women's priorities into management plans. So still there's a lot of labor dimensions around the activities and the resources that women use, primarily because of the household norms and women's roles in those. So it makes sense to include and engage women. Next slide, please. That brings us to where we are now, and I'm actually in Baringo now. We're doing community conversations, which are a gender transformative approach that engages whole villages in conversations around what are the priorities for adaptation, and also really supports equitable participation of every member within a community so that they decide what it is they want and then they kind of develop action plans around that. So it's been so far very engaging, and it's been a journey over the years that we continue to try to have the evidence to support the iterative process of responding to the demands of the communities where we are working. And the next and final slide is just to say thank you for your attention. And if you would like more details, we have a couple of publications around these activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renee, for your time and patience. The good idea to have voiceovers over the presentation sometimes backfire if things are not working out. Since it's already late, I hope you forgive me that I will be moving on to the last and final presentation and then see if there is some time left. I hope you forgive me this step.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I hand over to you, Caroline, and bring you your stuff. 1, 2, let's hope technics is working better now.
Okay, so I hope that you can hear me properly, and I hope that I can grasp the last of your attention from a very long day for probably all of us. I took the night train and the sleep was okay, but I really have to focus now to get this done. So my name is Caroline. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Development and Peace. We are located at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. And my talk is titled Why Female Farmers Cannot Farm Their Land to the Full Potential, Intersectional Causes for Poverty.
And before diving into the research, the field research itself and its findings, I want to give you a brief overview of the overall project the field research is located in to kind of give you the context. So we're carrying out a research project since 2015, so almost 15 years now, which is funded by the German Development Cooperation Ministry, BMZ, under the now called Special Initiative Transformation of Agricultural and Food Systems. And the project is called Ways Out of Poverty, Vulnerability, and Food Insecurity. And it's kind of an advisory research project. So we have the overall objective to develop recommendations for German Development Cooperation in order to get research-based findings on which strategies and instruments are successful in supporting people's efforts to improve their living conditions in an effective and sustainable way. And we are doing this on the basis of analysis of so-called good practice examples, which are kind of very successful and effective development cooperation projects. I can give you more details about that during a break or so, because otherwise the talk would be too long. But we are doing qualitative, mostly measures, but sometimes also quantitative methods. And yeah, we focus on rural areas, so non-urban areas, smallholder farmers, and country-wise, we are bound to the countries funded by the German Development Corporation under the special initiatives, which are mainly sub-Saharan African countries and some East Asian countries. So in the context of this research project, we carried out a field research trip to Zambia in March last year. And the overall objective was to assess the situation of smallholder farmers, their needs and the challenges they face. And we had a special focus on the issue of rural financial services. So what kind of financial service smallholder farmers use, where they get credit for from, and stuff like that. We carried out a study in the eastern province of Zambia, which you can see on the right-hand side on the map in 4 districts. And we mainly used in-depth interviews with key stakeholders. So for example, local chiefs, local authorities, also staff from banks or from microfinance institutions, staff from development cooperation projects, trying to improve financial services for smallholder farmers. And this is basically where the findings are coming from. We conducted several focus group discussions with smallholder farmers separately for men and women. And yeah, just for summarizing in short the whole study, we found out that first of all, secured access to land and long-term use rights are really the prerequisite for rural livelihoods and key to food security. But then in order to make use of that land, smallholder farmers need access to agricultural financing for investment in farm inputs and implements. So for example, in seeds or fertilizer. And they also need sufficient time and adequate labor force to carry out agriculture activities. And for example, to compensate for non-existent labor force in their family, they also need sometimes financial finance to pay daily laborers, for example. And although the study had not a specific gender focus, we of course came across various gender-specific barriers, which make it more difficult for female farmers to make the most out of their land that they farm. So first of all, and we heard this already during the plenary opening, but also today in the session here, is the double burden of labor. So female farmers have various household responsibilities, and which they have to balance with their farming activities, which then leaves them less time and also energy, of course, for their farming activities. They often have challenges in accessing equipment, also mechanized equipment. So most female farmers, smallholder farmers, rely on manual tools, which are very labor intensive. So in Eastern Province, most of these female farmers use hand hoes, sometimes ox plows, and especially single women, so widowed women or divorced women, they really highlighted the difficulty to not have the sufficient labor to fully cultivate their fields. So these aspects, which are of course interrelated, then often leads to fallow land or not being able to do their agricultural activities like tillage or sowing on time. And then this has negative effects on the productivity. And another pressing issues for female farmers was the marketing issue. So a lot of them voiced difficulties in accessing good markets for their harvests due to limited mobility and the issue of transportation in rural areas. They often greatly rely on so-called briefcase buyers, so buyers who visit villages but also offer only low prices, whereas men more often are going to the nearest local markets. Then there's, and this was, as I said, one of the focus of the study, the lack of financial means for investments. So female farmers more often rely on so-called village bands, so smaller saving groups where they can at least get some finance out of to buy inputs, for example. They have limited access to formal credit or other financial services from microfinance institutions, for example. They often are also voice kind of reservations via other formal and non or semi-formal financial services. And they often said that they don't even have the collateral to apply for a credit, for example. And they also greatly rely on other additional income generating activities, which then also kind of exacerbates the time aspects or the labor shortage of labor issue. And last but not least, the lack of decision-making power in the household. So female farmers often have limited control over farming income, especially when they are farming family fields. And they often said that their husbands are controlling the income they have, usually spend it on alcohol, for example, is a big issue. And also domestic violence was voiced as a very pressing issue for female farmers. So what can we then do, or what has to be done to promote women's agriculture activities? And I just want to focus on two aspects. So the aspect of financial services and the aspect of mechanization. Of course, there are many more things we could draw from. So financial services need to be closer to rural communities, especially to make them accessible for female farmers. And in Zambia, we stumbled upon this very good practice example called the Itamba bus, which you can see on the right-hand side in the upper picture, which is basically a regular bus, which was then converted into a mobile bank branch, which drives around and comes into the villages. And it also plays music, it offers Wi-Fi. And so for a lot of smallholder farmers, men and women, but especially women, it's really a low threshold opportunity to make first contacts to financial services. Then, of course, women-only saving groups are also a pathway to financial independence, although these only usually only grant smaller amounts of money. And when it comes to machinery, to elevate the issue of labor shortage, for example, it is important, or it's advisory, that agriculture machinery is adapted to female usage requirement. And there on the picture down the picture, you can see a trailer which can be adapted to a walking tractor to make the use of the walking tractor, which is usually very heavy in the hands and especially difficult to use for older women, or also women carrying a child on their back, for example. They can adapt it to their walking tractor, and then they can just sit on the trailer and use the walking tractor. And it's a very, very cheap trailer because it's not very high-end trailer, and but it has a very significant effect. And also the expansion of tractor service and equipment rental could at least for some parts of their agriculture activities offer female farmers access to mechanization. And last but not least, but I think this is the most important point, which I don't want to leave unsaid, is challenging negative gender and social norms, which we already also touched upon previous talks. Yeah, if you have further questions, you can approach me or write me an email. On the right-hand side, I included a QR code where you find more information about the research project and also all our publications. They are open access, so you can use them, you can read them online or download them. I also brought some hard copies in German and English, so if you want a hard copy, you can also just approach me. And yeah, thank you for your attention late in the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I think we have 5 minutes left. Are there any questions? There's a question over there. 1 second. Let's use the mic so people online can also hear us. Hey.
Hello. All right, mine is just a short one. Thank you for your presentation. I was just curious though, did you go to an extent of having a focus group, maybe with men and women together, to just try and see how maybe the women behave around, you know, their counterparts? And then I think the other one, I forgot it, but maybe if I go through the slides, I'll remember it. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I think I forgot to mention that since we got a lot of gender issues out of the first study, I'm planning to do a second study in March next year, so 2 years after, to dive deeper into the gender issue. And I think it would be a great add-on to also do what you suggested, just to see how also to observe kind of how people kind of work with each other. I think what I found very interesting conducting the focus group discussions was how different also women groups spoke about their husbands or about gender roles in general. So there were ones that really said like, oh, we need the man being bad because then we can be stronger or something like that. So they were making kind of fun out of it. Others were very like shy. So you can really see also there that the coping mechanism is very different also from village to village, from group to group.
Are you satisfied? Yes? Any other question? All right. Thank you very much, Caroline. Thanks so much. Yeah? Applause. I think it's a good place. All right. It's already 6:30, and Andreas Melcher, he told me that I have to close the session on time because I have a reputation for being late. He also told me that I should tell you once more that there is the apéro, so the first evening party now. It's actually in that building, you see, that's the steel building, that's the wood building that he was talking about today. So I think at 6:30 there is drinks and food over there. So please feel invited. I hope to see you all there. We can extend our conversations over there. Renee, thanks so much once more for your patience with our technical difficulties. And hereby I close the session and wish you all a very nice evening and a lot of fun and inspiring conversations in the course of this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you.